happening. So I think it's important to recognize where the AI is being implemented. So for businesses looking to increase productivity, there is huge potential for them to utilize what's already out there to help them. But if we are starting to see AI across social media, AI across consumer requirements, or AI in highly regulated industries, then we definitely need to step up the governance framework. Leaders are really chasing productivity gains by making huge investments in AI. So maybe over half of businesses are really trying to build AI into their system, highlighting, the executive decision to bring in AI. However, organizations are not always considering whether AI they're embracing is actually bringing genuine benefits, or they're not thinking about the risks that they are potentially opening their organization up to. Sometimes there's a misconception that standards are red tape or a burden, but they're not. They're about making it easier to do business. They're about bringing clarity and consistency. An example of this we can see around online safety. So the Online Safety Act isn't AI focused. However, the fact that Ofcom have just opened up investigation on how AI is being used across the social media platform, for instance, on X, it shows that regulatory requirements are in effect on AI. Once assessed, the regulator is empowered to inflict hefty fines on businesses that break those requirements.
Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Sahar Danesh from the BSI to talk about AI and standards. Sahar, welcome to the podcast. Before we get started, if I could ask you to introduce yourself and to say a little bit about BSI as well, please.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Thanks for having me. I'm a huge fan. So I'm Sahar Danesh. I'm Senior Government Engagement Manager and Digital Policy Lead at BSI. I lead BSI's engagement with government on digital and tech policy across a number of areas, including AI, quantum, data, cybersecurity, telecoms, and digital governance. Basically, my job is to help identify opportunities where standards can deliver tangible benefit for UK businesses and society. I'm a chartered engineer. I'm a fellow of my engineering institution. I have a career that spans across consultancy and central government, and I've had policy roles in a couple of big engineering institutions, including the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Institution of Engineering and Technology. I've been at BSI for about 8 years now. BSI is the UK's national standards body. It's incorporated by Royal Charter and is responsible for preparing British standards. It coordinates the input of UK experts into international standards organisations in Europe, CEN-CENELEC and ETSI, and internationally in ISO and IEC. We also work very closely with government on their participation in ITU, and I'm delighted to be part of the UK delegation to represent UK interests in that SDO.
Thank you for that introduction. I guess what would be really interesting to start with is what's BSI doing in this AI standard space? Just give us a quick overview as to what's going on, Sahar, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Yeah, BSI is doing quite a lot, actually. As the national standards body, BSI has extensive experience in bringing experts together to capture good practice. And that includes industry, government, academia, consumers. In fact, it's actually this year is our 125th anniversary, and we'll be celebrating the positive impact we've had on society through promoting consistency, trust, and quality for businesses. Our heritage really builds on that foundation of trying to address today's challenges, and obviously AI is a really big one. The UK, through BSI, is one of 50 countries working on international standards as we speak. These international standards are developed around risk management, explainability, testing, and functional safety of AI across the international SDOs, ISO, and IEC. There is quite an extensive list of standards that are global best practice, which can provide businesses with guidance on how to implement and use AI. For example, the UK just recently had a very significant role in shaping an AI management system standard. It's called BS ISO AC 42001, and it's designed to enable the safe, secure, and responsible use of AI. It was just published 2 years ago, but we're already seeing quite significant adoption by businesses around the world to help align with the standard. What the standard really does, it helps organizations use AI responsibly, and it also helps with transparency in decision making. There's quite an extensive portfolio of standards, but it's also important to make sure that, recognizing that good governance is not just about standards, and it's also about assurance, testing, certification, and BSI is active in those areas as well. We have a separate team at BSI that are delivering certification and training to AI standards, and we're seeing clients span from across healthcare, financial, and professional services. But also, BSI is processing its objective of becoming a notified body for AI. And what that means is that it continues to provide positive trust and oversight under regulatory requirements of AI. So, for instance, the EU AI Act, or building on their foundation of knowledge from medical devices and healthcare regulation in Europe.
Thank you for that kind of overview of all the activities that are going on in BSI. But when it comes to standards, particularly companies that are trading internationally, you've got different jurisdictions and different regulatory kind of frameworks, environments. Just wonder, how do you think companies are dealing with these different regulations and global standards?
Yeah, a really very interesting time now for AI regulation. We're seeing different nations and regions really looking at different approaches. Some regions are taking a harder approach to AI regulation, with other nations are more driving towards market-driven to allow innovation. And in some cases, innovation left a little bit unchecked. So that lack of consistency in the global landscape can make it very difficult for businesses to operate cross-border. It's difficult for them to be able to invest confidently in their strategies around trade and supply chains. And this is where standards can really come into their own, especially the standards we're talking about that are international. They enable interoperability and provide that foundation of good practice that can be implemented globally. So that means that, from that history of heritage of understanding that in the past, shipping containers were all set to one side to facilitate smooth trade, or we can now do the same to build best practice on AI management so that all nations have consistency and clarity, and this will hopefully help drive a more positive impact of AI use. So ISO standards are the same everywhere you go, and this consensus of good practice is very valuable in a time where we're seeing increased fragmentation. So standards by themselves are a distilled knowledge of hundreds of experts, so they can provide that insight for companies to pick up, knowing that everywhere in the world they're using these same practices, and that can really bridge the gap between different regulatory environments that we're seeing today.
But very often there's a conflict between what the business wants and what the business requirements are, and in terms of consumers and consumer protections. How do these conflicts begin to get resolved?
Yeah, and I think there's also a quite significant conflict between how businesses are adopting AI and versus how they're governing AI. And I think that's also very significant we're seeing. So sort of that interest of businesses to try and just use AI, they understand it's going to bring them huge gains, so they want to adopt it. BSI actually recently did a report. We did a survey of businesses, and we found that leaders are really chasing productivity gains by making huge investments in AI. So maybe over half of businesses are really trying to build AI into their system, highlighting, the executive decision to bring in AI. However, organizations are not always considering whether AI they're embracing is actually bringing genuine benefits, or they're not thinking about the risks that they are potentially opening their organization up to. Ultimately, investing in AI is only the start. Successful oversight of AI tools and how they're being used is critical. And then you also have to consider the impact you have once you implement AI on people, or whether that's your employees or your clients' rights to privacy or the wider consumer landscape. So harnessing AI successfully needs more than just enthusiasm. It needs governance, and it needs the guardrails to ensure that it's done correctly. The report that we did, actually, interestingly, highlighted a striking absence of guardrails. And research shows that less than a quarter of the companies reported that their organization had an AI governance program. And these rose a little bit more modestly on large enterprises. But, nearly half use AI is not controlled by formal processes, and only a third reported using voluntary codes of practice. And only a quarter of employees use AI tools in a monitored way. So this demonstrates that really there needs to be a lot more consideration when businesses are implementing AI to be able to manage some of that conflict of governance and guardrails. They said, just fifths of the businesses said that they had clear processes in place around use of confidential data for AI training. And we have standards for these. So standards exist on these areas to help close this gap of ambition and governance and trustworthy implementation. So by providing these guidances and helping helping organizations develop policies and guardrails, we can really try and actually see the benefit without having that sort of conflict that you noted. And by instilling these, we can also build the momentum of trust. And at this moment, lots of people still don't trust AI as much. Mm-hmm. And it's because of those guardrails that haven't been visibly implemented. So by instilling trust with stakeholders, you can make businesses recognized for their good practices and consumers feel more protected.
Given these standards are available, why do you think companies are not adopting them?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think, we know that around the world, lots of organizations are hugely aware of standards, but there's strong evidence that shows that maybe here in the UK, we maybe don't recognize the huge value that standards bring to organization. Sometimes there's a misconception that standards are red tape or a burden. But they're not. They're about making it easier to do business. They're about bringing clarity and consistency, and they can really do that in products, and that awareness exists within the product sector. So you know that you need a standard for your child's car seat, and you know that standards have fundamentally been there to help us, be interoperable internationally, like your credit card working everywhere you go. So I think it's just being able to take that step beyond products and recognizing how fundamentally systems can benefit from the use of standards.
You talked earlier about different regulatory jurisdictions having different approaches, and clearly some want to be kind of pro-innovation. There is this argument that if we have standards, they are bureaucracy, they are red tape, and they get in the way of innovation. What are your thoughts in terms of this ongoing debate on standards and regulations just kill innovation?
Yeah, I think that again goes back to that misconception, because on the ground, we see organizations utilizing standards to actually enable them to innovate and to operate more broadly and to enter supply chains. Companies use standards to reduce risk and win more business and grow more quickly. And in uncertain economic times, standards help restore confidence, both to the market and by allowing businesses to demonstrate their operational performance. And also, when we come to innovation, standards demonstrate to investors, partners, customers, and stakeholders that the organization is recognizing quality benchmarks. In fact, we actually did a study because an independent study with the Centre for Economic and Business Research, that they found that 23% of all UK GDP growth and 38% of UK productivity growth can be attributed to standards. And the study estimated that standards have boosted the UK annual GDP by 161 billion since 2000. And that's not a small sum. I think these stats are quantitative, but I think the qualitative stats are also very interesting. The examples where we see on the ground that standards have actually helped businesses thrive, especially on a global stage, because they enable new companies to enter into supply chains, because that they know that interoperability will enable them to slot into a supply chain at a global level. Developing nations are taking huge advantage of utilizing standards and to enable their businesses to start operating. And it can really, in a sense, be able to, we call them passports to trade, because they create a common technical language between businesses, consumers, and regulators to be able to work multiple jurisdictions. So here in the UK, that recognition sometimes doesn't make it past technical level towards the strategic level of adoption of standards. So we're trying to help fix that. We have a couple of programs that we're taking forward that awareness to try and break through some of these barriers and misconceptions. I work on a program called the AI Standards Hub, and it's a partnership between us, BSI, NPL, and the Alan Turing Institute, and it's supported by government. And the hub.
What's that? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but what's NPL?
Oh, sorry. The National Physical Laboratory. They do the measurements for all of the really important analytics that sit under AI data. So really interesting organization. Us, NPL, and Alan Turing Institute together, we have something called the AI Standards Hub. And the hub aims to help stakeholders navigate and understand how standards can support their AI adoption. It's a resource for developing knowledge and skills to effectively engage with the field of AI standardization. There's e-learning, there's in-person training events, and there's also a community for businesses to speak to each other about how they're interacting with standards and how they're interpreting and utilizing them. And there's training around a lot of the standards, for instance, the ISO IC 42001, the AI management system. And the hub is a free resource. Anyone can join. I would urge your listeners to visit the AI Standards Hub website, explore the resources, webinars, events. We have an event coming up in Glasgow, which hopefully we can help break through some of those misconceptions around standards.
Yes, and it seems to me that you've got standards being developed by BSI and which sound incredibly important, particularly given we have a history of having and setting standards very often for the rest of the world. And I'm talking about the UK now. And on the other hand, just about every organization I'm talking to is talking about the importance of AI governance. And it seems to me that if an organization's trying to put a governance framework in place, surely it would be useful or beneficial to that organization to have some or all of these standards or a version of those standards incorporated into their governance framework. Yet I don't see that connection being made. What do you think's going on there? Why is that connection between standards and governance not being made, or is it not possible to make that connection?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think multiple elements come together to shape a governance framework. So, as I said, standards are a key part of it, but there's a broader quality infrastructure element that businesses need to consider when they are creating their governance frameworks. So what do I mean by quality infrastructure? So the UK's quality infrastructure is actually quite world renowned. It's very well recognized, and it shapes the frameworks around measurements of quality and trust here in the UK. So it has multiple elements. It has standardization through BSI, which is the international and national standards we talked about. It has accreditation, and that's through the UK Accreditation Service, UCAS. And that ensures that whoever's carrying out conformity assessment, testing, certification, inspections, they are competent to do so. So that element also needs to be included. Another element, which we spoke about, is the National Physical Laboratory. It's the measurement element. So it's implementation of specifications to ensure accuracy, validity, and consistency in how AI is being adopted. Conformity assessment, that testing and certification, ensures that quality, and a lot of standards are designed to enable that conformity assessment. And standards can then products can meet go into the market and meet those specifications. And then finally, market surveillance to check whether products meet the applicable safety measures. And then here, if they don't, you can impose penalties and hefty fines. And the quality infrastructure also includes elements around policy, so whether that's government policy, but also regulation as well. And on emerging technology, we're only seeing the beginning of how this framework is coming together. So we spoke that there is quite a number of AI standards. AI insurance also is picking up momentum, and there's a wide recognition of the importance of third-party assurance ecosystem. But here in the UK, because we're still not seeing regulation being considered, it's potentially not coming into effect for a while, we are seeing models of voluntary still being primarily the source of governance structures in businesses. It's important to note that just because there isn't regulation on AI, and it doesn't mean that AI adoption and use is unregulated. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. We wait for the AI regulation. However, we're seeing that there are other regulatory models out there that cover AI that should be in consideration for businesses. An example of this we can see around online safety. So the Online Safety Act isn't AI focused. However, the fact that Ofcom have just opened up investigation on how AI is being used across the social media platform, for instance, on X, it shows that regulatory requirements are in effect on AI. Once assessed, the regulator is empowered to inflict hefty fines on businesses that break those requirements. And then there's other regulatory requirements like GDPR. Again, that has heavy sway on businesses that are utilizing AI with the requirements around privacy, bias, data protection. And it's also really important to not forget about legal requirements around human rights, because human rights are the fundamentals that really are laws that regulate quite a lot of how businesses operate with people. In the UK, the Equality and Human Rights Commission is the independent equality regulator, and it's a UN recognized A status national human rights institution. And AI has been a priority for them since 2022. And recognizing that while AI has huge benefits, it also comes with a wide range of risks, including risks to bias, discrimination, and risks to human rights. Internationally, the Office of the Human Rights Commission in Geneva have recognized this as well. And the use of AI has potential to result in breaches in a lot of the AI acts. The Office of Human Rights actually created a study on new pathways for incorporating human rights into standards development. And I think that's a really good example of how standards can help business implement some of the policies and procedures to safeguard human rights when adopting AI. For example, the right to privacy is enshrined in Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And a lot of standards are there to enable safe governance to allow for privacy. And they can help bridge that, that requirement of technical specification to those human rights that we talked about. So maybe we don't have regulation yet, and we're still at early stages, but there are still guardrails. But I will also admit, Ashley, that we're still at the beginning of this, and maybe we don't have everything we need just yet, especially now that large language models are becoming a fundamental part of decision making. I think we do need to start looking at how we govern AI going forward a bit more seriously.
What would you think should be put in place?
Well, I think a lot of how we incorporate AI in businesses, in most cases, businesses want to do the right thing. So I think it's important to recognize where the AI is being implemented. So for businesses looking to increase productivity, there is huge potential for them to utilize what's already out there to help them. But if we are starting to see AI across social media, AI across consumer requirements, or AI in highly regulated industries, then we definitely need to step up the governance framework.
I'm going to ask you an unfair question. I'm going to say, So what if I were to lift and shift you out of this interview into a boardroom,
Yeah.
a typical boardroom for an organization, um, and the board members turned to you and said, Sahar, so what advice would you give us? What should we do to ensure that we have good governance and that we are adopting these standards? What advice would you give? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I think, we talked a little bit about the misconception of standards. Um, and I talked a little bit about the economic benefit that standards can bring. So I think what I would say is I would urge them to engage with standards. Um, I think it's important that they recognize that on things like AI, don't let yourself be in a risk of sleepwalking into that governance gap that I highlighted. Explore the suite of standards that are available to support AI. Have a proactive approach to shaping your AI governance. AI is not just a technology for CTOs and CIOs to manage. It impacts every department. It's important that all voices are heard when defining these policies and procedures. And there needs to be that common understanding in a business. And there needs to be things like training and AI literacy, and enhancing competencies in an organization. And standards are there to really do all of this. So use them, come and talk to us. But also, I would say as well, they're all at technical level. Most businesses are using standards. So most businesses are familiar with, ISO 9001 around quality management and cybersecurity 27001, really well-known global standards. But there's a lot more in the national catalogue that help with that strategic implementation of best practice in the business. But I would also say step away from that technical and look at the well-being of people. And standards can really help there, especially around employer well-being. BSI actually has a really interesting growing suite of standards on well-being in the workplace that gives businesses tools to support their employees. So on things like AI training, AI literacy, but also more broader, we have standards on menopause in the workplace, suicide awareness, inclusive PPE, so many standards around anti-modern slavery in the supply chain, so many standards that can really be fundamental in how a business can operate in a trustworthy way. So yeah, come and engage.
Sahar, thank you so much for a really insightful conversation. I think people are clearly aware about the need for governance. I think the importance of incorporating some of the standards. Perhaps I don't see this as a copy and paste of every aspect of a standard coming into an organization, but to lean into some of the standards that are available may well help an organization to accelerate its AI governance frameworks and put some structures in place for that. I think the distinction that you've made between, having a set of technical standards, but really it's not just adhering to the technical standards, but really the organizational, the strategic, the business, the people standards as well. And there are regulations around in AI. There may not be a UK AI Act, but certainly the EU has its AI Act that a number of organizations are already having to comply with. But you've mentioned a number of pieces of legislation and also some regulations that are here in the UK that companies are already having to adhere to. So by integrating a set of standards that you've mentioned, I think that really could help organizations to kind of speed up the level of adoption that I think many organizations are struggling with at the moment. So Sahar, thank you so much for joining me on the AI Adoption Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Ashley.